All right, so you want to know what's really going on with China, huh? All this talk about their military buildup, cognitive warfare. Sounds like something straight out of a Tom Clancy novel, right? Well, we're going to deep dive into all that today.
It's definitely a hot topic right now, and for good reason.
Yeah, no kidding. We're going to be looking at a recent article from The Federalist, written by Chuck DeVore, and a pretty intense Reddit discussion it sparked. Lots of different opinions flying around out there.
And it's not just about opinions. We're talking hard numbers, strategic analysis, and some pretty scary scenarios, to be honest.
No sugarcoating here, folks. We're going to lay it all out. So
Yeah.
let's jump right in. DeVore's article starts off with some pretty shocking figures. He talks about China adding a ton of new weapons, like 50 intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs. Those are the ones that could actually reach the U.S.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg. We're talking hundreds of other missiles, two medium range, long range, a whole arsenal.
It's a serious buildup, no doubt.
Yeah.
And then there's the nuclear warhead count. DeVore says they could have over 1,000 by 2030.
It's a staggering increase, and it raises a lot of questions about China's intentions.
Okay, so big question here. Is this just China flexing its muscles, showing off its new toys? Or is something more serious going on?
Well, DeVore argues it's definitely more than just showing off. He compares it to what Nazi Germany was doing in the years leading up to World War II. He says this isn't just about military strength, it's about an ideology, a worldview they're trying to impose.
So basically they're backing up their ambitions with serious firepower.
Exactly. The Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, has big goals for China's place in the world, and they're willing to use this military might to achieve those goals.
That's pretty unsettling. And it makes you wonder, while we were busy fighting the war on terror, were we missing the bigger picture? Was China strategically planning this whole time?
It's hard not to think that. And this isn't just about the sheer number of weapons either. There's also this whole other dimension that DeVore brings up, cognitive warfare. Honestly, it sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie.
Yeah, cognitive warfare is one of those terms that makes you tilt your head and go, huh, what exactly does that mean? It sounds pretty intense.
It's about using information as a weapon, not just propaganda, but actually messing with people's minds.
Okay, so like psychological warfare, but amped up for the digital age.
Exactly. Think disinformation campaigns, deep fakes, manipulation on social media. They're trying to sow chaos, crush morale, and ultimately control the narrative.
And they're using some pretty advanced tech to do it, right? DeVore mentions deepfakes, those AI-generated videos that are so realistic they could be used to spread fake news or even impersonate world leaders.
And then there's the whole issue of psychological manipulation happening on platforms like TikTok, which, as you know, is owned by a Chinese company.
Right, and let's not forget about the AI-powered voice synthesizers they're developing. It's like they're creating an army of digital ghosts to spread disinformation.
And it's really effective because it exploits how we consume information these days. People are constantly bombarded with news and opinions online. It's easy to get overwhelmed and lose track of what's real and what's not.
So they're preying on our biases, our emotions, that instinct to believe what we see and hear, especially online.
Yeah.
It's a whole new kind of battlefield, and it sounds pretty tough to defend against.
It is, because it's not just about blocking certain websites or filtering out certain keywords. It's about building up your own mental defenses, your own ability to discern truth from falsehood.
That's a good point. It's almost like we need to develop our own mental immune system to fight off this information warfare. Speaking of defense, one Redditor brought up the Leonidas EMP system, which is designed to take out drones by frying their electronics. Is that a realistic concern, given how much China is investing in drone technology?
Absolutely. It highlights the cat and mouse game between offensive and defensive tech. What works today might be useless tomorrow.
And China's drone program is massive, right? They're pumping a ton of money and resources into it.
They are. So yeah, the EMP threat is definitely something to keep an eye on. It's a reminder that we need to stay ahead of the curve when it comes to developing countermeasures.
Okay, so we've got this huge military buildup and this unsettling cognitive warfare strategy. And then there's the timeline the CCP has laid out. Taiwan readiness by 2027, regional dominance by 2035, and a world-class military by 2049. Ambitious, to say the least. But do you think they're being upfront about their goals, or is this a bit of a smokescreen?
It's hard to say for sure. Those are some aggressive timelines. There's definitely skepticism about whether those dates are real or just a way to mislead other countries.
So playing a little mind game with the rest of the world.
Possibly. China has a long history of being secretive about its military capabilities. It wouldn't be surprising if they were deliberately downplaying their progress to avoid alarming their neighbors.
But that makes it even more crucial to pay attention to what they're actually doing, not just what they're saying.
Exactly. Actions speak louder than words, especially in the realm of geopolitics.
All right, so we're starting to get a pretty complex picture here. China is ramping up its military, potentially downplaying its true capabilities. And, oh yeah, they're developing some pretty mind-bending warfare tactics. But here in the U.S., we're not exactly in a great position to counter all this. DeVore spends a lot of time talking about our financial troubles, our massive national debt, and how that's putting a squeeze on our defense budget.
It's a serious problem. It's like we're trying to run a 21st century arms race with a credit card that's maxed out.
DeVore says we need to rebuild our Navy, modernize our nuclear arsenal, basically play catch-up. But how do we do all that when we're already drowning in debt? That's the trillion-dollar question, isn't it?
It is, and there are no easy answers. DeVore suggests we need to find savings within the Pentagon itself, which is a pretty controversial idea.
Yeah, I bet that will ruffle some feathers. What exactly does he propose?
He talks about cutting programs that are redundant, getting rid of outdated initiatives, and this one's interesting, reducing the bureaucracy within the Department of Defense. Less red tape, more bang for our buck, basically.
Okay, I get the logic there.
Yeah.
But wouldn't shrinking the military also make us more vulnerable? It seems like a risky move.
It's all about finding the right balance. We need to be leaner and more efficient, yes, but without sacrificing our core strengths. It's about making tough choices, prioritizing the programs that are absolutely essential, and streamlining the rest.
So less waste, more strategic spending. It makes sense in theory, but the devil's in the details, right? How do we actually implement those kinds of changes in such a massive and complex organization like the Pentagon?
It's definitely a challenge, but DeVore argues that it's not impossible. He points to successful efforts in the past to streamline defense spending and eliminate waste. The key is to have strong leadership, a clear vision, and a willingness to make tough decisions.
Okay, so less talk, more action. Let's hope someone's listening. Now, I want to shift gears for a second and talk about something that came up in that Reddit discussion that really caught my attention. China's ghost cities. Entire cities built out, but nobody's living there. What's the deal with that?
It's a fascinating phenomenon. You've got these massive urban landscapes, meticulously planned and built, but they're largely empty. It's a bit surreal, to be honest.
It is. It's like they built these cities for a future that never arrived.
Mm-hmm.
What's the explanation? Is it a sign that China's economy is in trouble, like some people are saying?
Well, it's not quite that simple. It's more about how their economy and culture work, which can be hard to grasp from a Western perspective. In China, owning property is seen as a major investment, a way to secure your future. So a lot of these ghost cities are actually owned, even though nobody lives there.
So it's not necessarily a sign of economic collapse, but it does raise some questions about their long-term growth prospects.
It does, and it highlights the fact that we need to look beyond just military calculations when we're trying to understand China's motivations. They're playing a different game with different rules.
That's a good point. We need to broaden our perspective. Okay, so we've got this puzzle of the ghost cities. But getting back to the U.S. response, we've talked about budget cuts and setting priorities. But what about those specific recommendations DeVore makes? Things like rebuilding the Navy and modernizing our nuclear arsenal. Those are massive undertakings. Do we actually have the time and resources to do all that?
That's the sense of urgency DeVore is trying to convey. He argues that we can't afford to wait. The longer we drag our feet, the further behind we fall, and the harder it will be to catch up.
And it's not about trying to one-up China, right? It's about preventing them from getting any aggressive ideas. If they see weakness, if they think we're not willing to stand up for ourselves, that could embolden them to make a risky move.
Exactly. Strength discourages aggression, weakness invites it. It's a fundamental principle of international relations.
So we need to project strength, not just for our own sake, but for the sake of global stability.
Precisely. And that's why DeVore is so adamant about the need to rebuild U.S. military strength across the board.
Okay, so we're talking about rebuilding our Navy, modernizing our nuclear arsenal, strengthening our missile defenses. It's a tall order, to say the least. DeVore also mentioned something called restoring maritime lift capacity. What exactly does that mean? And why is it so important in this whole China situation?
Maritime lift capacity is basically our ability to move troops and equipment quickly and efficiently across oceans. It's about having the right ships, the right planes, and the logistical support to deploy large-scale military forces wherever they're needed.
So it's like the military's version of FedEx. We need to be able to deliver the goods, so to speak.
That's a good analogy. It's about being able to project power and respond to crises effectively, no matter where they occur.
And why is this particularly important when we're talking about China?
Because China is becoming increasingly assertive in the Indo-Pacific region. They're building up their navy, expanding their presence in the South China Sea, and making territorial claims that are disputed by other countries.
So we need to be able to respond to these challenges, and that means having the ability to move troops and equipment quickly.
Exactly. We need to be able to project power in the region, not just to protect our own interests, but also to reassure our allies and deter potential aggression.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack here. China's military ambitions, this whole cognitive warfare thing, the need to rebuild our own military, all while dealing with a serious financial crunch. It's a lot to think about.
It definitely is, and it shows just how important it is to have informed discussions and make smart strategic decisions. The stakes are high, and the choices we make in the coming years will have a profound impact on global security and stability. You mentioned earlier, about the war on terror and maybe the U.S. taking its eye off the ball. DeVore spends a lot of time in this article talking about our national debt, our massive national debt, really, and how that could be a major problem when it comes to, countering China.
Yeah, it's a tough spot to be in. It's like we're trying to run this 21st century arms race, but we're using like a maxed out credit card. I mean, DeVore says we need to rebuild the Navy, modernize the nuclear arsenal. It all sounds pretty expensive, right?
It is. There's no way around it. And honestly, there are no easy answers here. DeVore suggests that we need to find some savings within the Pentagon itself, but I'm pretty sure, just thinking about it, that's going to face some pushback. People aren't going to be too happy about cutting the defense budget.
Yeah, it's a touchy subject for sure.
Yeah.
But what does he actually suggest? Like, what could be cut?
Well, he talks about a few things, like it may be cutting some programs that are, overlapping. Maybe we're doing the same thing twice and we don't need to. Or getting rid of some of the older initiatives, the ones that are, outdated. But there's one thing that it's pretty interesting, actually. He suggests cutting down on the bureaucracy, all the bureaucracy within the Department of Defense.
So cutting the red tape.
Yeah.
Getting more bang for our buck.
Exactly. Less waste, more efficiency.
Okay, so in theory, that makes sense. But I think some people might worry that if we shrink the military, even if it's just the bureaucracy, it could make us more vulnerable.
Yeah, that's a fair point. It's definitely a balancing act. We want to be more efficient. We want to cut waste. Yeah, of course. But we can't sacrifice our core strengths. It really comes down to making some hard choices about which programs are really, really important, the absolutely vital programs, and then, maybe streamline the rest.
So less waste, more strategic spending. Makes sense. But, we've talked a lot about the serious stuff. I want to shift gears for a minute and talk about something a little bit lighter. It actually came up in that Reddit discussion we mentioned, and I found it pretty fascinating. It's the whole thing about China's ghost cities.
Oh, yeah?
Entire cities, all built out. Skyscrapers, apartments, everything. But nobody's living there.
It is pretty weird when you think about it. You see pictures of these places, and they're massive. Huge cities, perfectly planned and built, but deserted.
It's almost like, they built these places for a future that just never showed up.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder, right? Is it a sign that their economy is in trouble, like some people are saying? Or is it something else?
Well, it's a little more complicated than that. It's about, how their economy works and their culture, too. It's different. It can be kind of hard to understand from, a Western perspective. In China, owning property, owning land, it's a really big deal. It's seen as like a super safe investment.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So a lot of these ghost cities, they're actually owned by people, even though nobody lives there. They're holding on to them, kind of like a savings account, waiting for the value to go up.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's not necessarily a sign of economic collapse, but it does, raise some questions about their long-term growth.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely something to keep an eye on. But it does show that we need to, broaden our perspective when we're trying to understand China. They don't always play by the same rules as everyone else.
Okay, that makes sense. It's like a whole different ball game over there. But, getting back to the U.S. response, we talked about budget cuts and prioritizing. But DeVore also makes some specific recommendations. Rebuilding the Navy, modernizing the nuclear arsenal. These are huge projects. Do we actually have the time to do all that? We were just talking about how we're in debt.
Well, that's the urgency DeVore is talking about. He says we really can't afford to wait. Every year we wait, we fall further behind. And it becomes harder to catch up.
And it's not just about keeping up with China, right? It's about making sure they don't get any funny ideas. If they see us as weak, if they think we're not willing to, stand up for ourselves or our allies, that's dangerous.
Exactly. It could embolden them, make them more likely to make a risky move. Strength discourages aggression. Weakness, on the other hand, invites it.
So we need to project strength, not just for us, but for, everyone.
Yeah.
Global stability and all that.
Right. And that's really what DeVore is getting at. We need to rebuild our military strength across the board.
Okay, so rebuilding the Navy, modernizing the nukes, yeah. But he also mentioned something called restoring maritime lift capacity. What is that exactly?
Well, basically, it means being able to move troops and equipment quickly across oceans, I mean. Like, if we need to get a lot of soldiers and tanks and stuff to the other side of the world, we need to be able to do it fast.
So like a military version of FedEx.
Pretty much. We need to be able to project power and respond to crises, wherever they pop up. And that means having the right ships, planes, all the logistics.
Okay, so why is that particularly important when we're talking about China?
Well, think about it. China is becoming more and more assertive, especially in the Pacific. They're building up their navy, they're expanding their presence in the South China Sea, and they're, making these claims on territory that other countries say is theirs.
Right.
So we need to be able to counter those moves. We need to make sure things stay stable in the region. And that means, being able to move troops and equipment around quickly.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot of stuff today, huh? China's military, their ambitions, cognitive warfare, our own military, our budget. It's a lot.
It is, and it's complicated. But this is important stuff. We're talking about global security, global stability. The choices we make now, they're going to have huge consequences down the line.
No pressure, right?
Yeah.
But seriously, it's good to talk about this stuff, to really get into the details and understand what's going on.
I agree. The more we understand, the better equipped we are to, make informed decisions and advocate for policies that keep us safe.
All right, so let's take a quick break here. We'll be back in a few minutes to wrap things up and talk about what all this means for you, our listener, what you can do, how to stay informed, all that good stuff. Stay tuned. All right, so we're back, and before we wrap things up, I want to circle back to something we talked about earlier, this whole cognitive warfare thing. It's pretty creaky when you really think about it. It's like they're trying to win the war before it even starts by, messing with our minds.
It's a different kind of battlefield, that's for sure. They're not just trying to defeat you physically, they're trying to undermine you mentally. Make you doubt yourself, make you question your own reality.
It's like they're trying to hack our brains.
Yeah.
And they're using some seriously advanced technology to do it.
Oh, yeah. Deep fakes, AI-powered disinformation campaigns. It's like something out of a sci-fi novel.
And it's happening right now, right? It's not some far-off future threat. This stuff is already out there. And it's pretty unsettling. I mean, if you can't even trust what you see and hear, what can you trust?
That's the challenge. It's about developing a kind of mental self-defense. You need to be able to filter the information you're taking in, learn to recognize the signs of manipulation.
It's almost like we need to develop a mental immune system to fight off this information virus.
Well,
that's easier said than done, right?
Right.
Especially with social media. It's like information overload, and everybody's got an opinion, everybody's shouting their version of the truth. How do you even know where to start?
It can be overwhelming, for sure. But that's why it's so important to be aware of the tactics they're using. The more you understand how this stuff works, the better equipped you are to defend yourself against it.
Okay, so let's zoom out a little bit. We've covered a lot of ground today, from China's military buildup to their cognitive warfare strategy to the challenges the U.S. is facing. What's the big takeaway for our listener? What should they be thinking about after this deep dive?
Well, I think the main thing is that China is a serious competitor. And they're not playing by the same rules as everyone else. They're thinking long-term, they're playing the long game, and they're willing to use any and all means at their disposal to achieve their goals.
So we need to be prepared, we need to be smart, and we definitely can't afford to be complacent.
Absolutely. And we need to be engaged. This isn't just something for, politicians and generals to worry about. This affects all of us. It's about our security, our economy, our way of life.
So what can we do as individuals, I mean? It's easy to feel powerless when you're talking about these huge global forces.
It's not about feeling powerless. It's about feeling empowered. The more informed we are, the better choices we can make. And the more we understand the challenges, the better equipped we are to hold our leaders accountable.
I like that. Taking an active role, not just being passive observers. So what's the one thing you want people to remember as they're trying to make sense of all this?
China is a complex country with complex motivations. Don't fall into the trap of thinking you've got them all figured out. Stay curious, keep learning, and be willing to challenge your own assumptions.
Well said. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us. And remember, this is just the beginning of the conversation. Stay informed, stay engaged, and keep asking questions, because the future depends on it.